Well, okay, everybody, welcome. It is 6:05, and I guess we'll get started. I have the pleasure of getting to introduce everybody. I think my screen says Granville. That's my son's name because in this new reality, even 5-year-olds have Zoom meetings that they have to be at or where they have to go. But my name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the executive director of Writing Workshops Dallas. I want to thank you all for being here in our new reality. I'm seeing that we have about 80 people here with us to listen to this great panel that Alex has put together for tonight. And so real quick, I'm just going to introduce everybody and then I'm going to hand it over to Alex. And I'm just really excited you all are here and I can't wait to listen to what we're about to hear. So let me tell you who everybody is. Alex Temblador, she is the founder and moderator of LitTalk, and she's the award-winning author of Secrets of the Casa Rosada. She is an internationally published freelance writer. Her starred Kirkus novel was a Kirkus Best of YA Books of 2018. Her articles have appeared in Architectural Digest, Lonely Planet, The Daily Beast, Travel and Leisure, Bustle, Texas Highways, and D Magazine, among many others. And when Alex approached me about doing LitTalk, this was her idea. When she approached Writing Workshops Dallas, we immediately had the idea to partner with Interabang Books, which if you haven't been to their physical location or been to their website, they are an amazing independent bookstore here in Dallas. We're very happy that Ishita Kent is with us tonight from Interabang Books. Ishita will be posting links to our panelist books along with recommendations for their favorite books on the craft of writing. So you can click on those links if you have not yet read their books or you're looking for another great book on the craft of writing. And tonight we're so happy that our panelists include Sarah Hepola, who is the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir Blackout, Remembering the Things I Drank to Forget. Her work has appeared in Texas Monthly, Elle, Glamour, The Guardian, The New York Times, and Salon, where she ran the personal essays section for many years. She is currently working on her second memoir about dating in her 40s called Unattached. We also have Kendra Allen. She is the author of the essay collection When You Learn the Alphabet, which is the winner of the 2018 Iowa Prize for Literary Nonfiction from the University of Iowa Press. Kendra was born and raised in Dallas and holds an MFA from the University of Alabama. You can find other works from Kendra in Brevity, December, and The Rumpus, among others. And her poetry collection, The Collection Plate, is forthcoming from Echo. And we also have Tracy Walder, who is a former staff operations officer at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center and a special agent at the FBI's Los Angeles Field Office, specializing in Chinese counterintelligence operation. She sits on the board of directors for Girl Security, a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that brings national security curriculum to girls in high schools throughout the US. I know we're on mute, but let's have a nice warm applause for our panelists and for our founder and moderator, Alex Temblador, who I will now turn it over to. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. 1 second, guys. Okay, I'm so excited to have everybody here today. If I pause, it's probably because I'm inviting another participant in. We're at 85 participants right now, which is amazing. When I was speaking to Blake earlier, he told me we would have people all the way from London who had signed up. We have people all over the United States. And so even though I started this for the Dallas-Fort Worth community to highlight DFW-based authors, I'm really excited that this weird pandemic has given us the opportunity to showcase DFW authors and their stories to the world. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with Tracy, Kendra, and Sarah. Thank you all for being with me tonight. Let's get started. Okay, so I like to just have each of you answer some questions all together, and then I'm probably going to point out you personally to ask you specific questions about your work and about your stories. But to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your book in your own words? I think it helps for the audience to get to know your work, especially from you. So Sarah, would you like to start?
Yes, I would. I would love to start. Yeah. So my book is called Blackout, and it's basically the story of how I fell in love with alcohol and why I needed to walk away. And so it's basically a recovery memoir. And then within that, I wanted to do a certain some journalism elements. Like there's a certain amount of like science of what the blackout is, because blackout drinking was this plague of my drinking years. So there's a little journalism in there. And then I also wanted to kind of turn a lens on the culture that had raised me. And that's partly Dallas, and also New York, where I was living during a lot of my drinking years. And then it's partly just, the late 20th century and early 20th and 21st century, and the culture of women and drinking. So, so my book is a memoir, and then it has other elements that are kind of threaded throughout it. I guess I'll stand there.
Nice. Kendra, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Okay, so When You Learn the Alphabet is an essay collection, but it also blends poetry in some of those essays as well. And for the most part, it's about me coming into adulthood and the things that I've learned through adolescence from like my parents and my friends, and how that shifted when I like went off to college to Chicago, and I began to like learn about race outside of Dallas, and gender outside of Dallas, and code switching, and like being faced with all these things that I've been taught, and coming face to face with unlearning those things in adulthood. So it's just me writing through things that I want to rewrite about.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tracy, would you like to go next?
Sure. My book is a memoir. It reads a little bit differently, though, than a lot of sort of the CIA spy books that are out there. A lot of the CIA spy books are very clinical in nature, and this is definitely more novel-ish in nature. It kind of takes you through my life of sort of being always underestimated, from having a birth defects when I was little, and kind of growing up through that, and sort of not much was expected of me, and sort of what became of me. But going on this journey, I never always wanted to be a spy. I wanted to be a high school history teacher, and so it kind of bookends with me ultimately being a high school history teacher. So it walks you through my life, but I tried to make it as relatable as possible and with as much dialogue as possible. I focus less on, I focus on terrorism, obviously, that's what I worked on, but I focus less on a deep dive of that and just more on sort of overcoming a lot of different obstacles.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so my next question is, how did y'all come to be memoir nonfiction authors? Tracy, since you just went last, I'll let you start with this one.
So I had, prior to doing this, I had been writing, but definitely more journalistic in nature. I was writing for the HuffPo and Salon and some other places. And my husband had always been bothering me to write a book. And I'm relatively private. And so I always sort of said, no. But having a daughter really changed my perspective on the world. And I was really starting to get frustrated with the gender narrative and the lack of seeing females in national security and law enforcement careers. And so I think that was really a tipping point for me in terms of writing my book.
Nice. Kendra?
Yeah, I'm not gonna even lie. I think somebody had to tell me that I'm a memoirist, because it wasn't clicking. Like, I still struggle even calling myself a writer. So like, even somebody calling me something specific, it was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. An essayist, a memoirist. I think I always like had an inclination to lean towards like factual stories. I thought I was gonna be a journalist, a music journalist, and then like that wasn't working out. But then I just found myself leaning towards even music that hip hop is supposed to be like the true stories, and they're not always true, but like just that storytelling narrative of like being human. I felt that and felt drawn to that. So when I actually got into a workshop class, that's what I wanted to do. I found it hard to sort of like create characters because like my family is characters on their own, and like my friends are characters on their own. So I didn't really, it came natural to like write about my life versus forcing anything else.
Nice. Sarah. Wait, Sarah, you're on mute.
Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself. So I just grew up wanting to be a writer. That's all I knew. I just wanted to do something with words. I didn't know what it meant to be a what kind of writer. But I guess because I read books, I wanted to be a novelist. And it wasn't until I got to college that I learned that there was a thing, you know, like journalism, and they would pay you to see movies and music, and I did do that. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna ride this train for a while. And I think it was probably around in my 20s, I stopped being able to like invent worlds when I would write, and I just started wanting to write about my own life. I mean, it's kind of what Kendra was just saying, where the things that were happening in my life or the people around me overtook what my imagination was coming up with. And I noticed in my journalism writing that when I wrote about somebody else, it was a little bit flat. And then when I wrote about myself, which was sort of like my internal world, like my insecurities or what I had been thinking versus what I said. I mean, all the stuff that you can do in written language, which is you can show the divide between who someone is and who they want to be, that I was just much, much better at that when it was happening to me. And it was really accidental. And it was slightly embarrassing. I mean, I don't think it was like a good thing that I realized that like my great subject was myself. That was not at all intentional. I do know that when I was 25 years old, the memoir boom was kind of happening. And there was a book by Dave Eggers called A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. And if you, like, it was huge at the time. And it was this book that I read, and it was like that moment where you realize what you want to be when you grow up. And the way that he was talking, and he had captured the voice of a person, like the internal voice that you keep in your mind, he had captured it on the page. And that was like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And I want to let people walk alongside me. It just, the intimacy of it was shocking. So I think as soon as I realized the potential of like what you could do with the memoir, then I became very excited about doing it. And then it just really so happened that over the next 20 years, the landscape of both journalism and publishing just kind of kept tilting me toward memoir. When I moved up to New York and I was running this, when I was running the culture section at Salon, the personal essays were just blowing up. And so I made that my area, like my big area of expertise, was that I was just really good at helping people tell their own stories. And I think, I don't know, this is like a much longer thing about why we became kind of hooked on people's stories at a time when Facebook and all those things were blowing up. And a lot of times people say it's because we're narcissistic. And I think it's something different. I think it's because we were so hungry for people to tell us the truth about their own life, that so many people were lying and presenting themselves falsely on social media, that there began to be a hunger for someone that would just step out of line and say, no, I'm really struggling, and this is what it's like to be human. And I felt like memoir uniquely answered that question, and I just happened accidentally to be good at it. So that's why.
Wow, I love that answer. I think all of you kind of pointed out that, and especially Sarah just there, that memoir gave you a chance to be authentic, to show people a different side that maybe they don't see externally, and to kind of maybe make some changes to the world. But to do that, you had to share secrets. You had to share like this inner self part of you, thoughts that you might not have said aloud to people. maybe discuss national secrets a little bit too. Uh, but how do you do that? How do you write these memoirs, tell your story, talk about embarrassing things or things that are really like scary to showcase to the world? And I'll let whoever wants to answer that first go ahead.
Oh, I'll go. I think for me, I was literally teaching a class this morning about self-implication when it comes to memoir and like personal narrative and things like that. And I know for me, the memoirs that doesn't really resonate with me is ones that didn't build trust with me as a reader by self-implicating themselves. And I think about that all the time when I'm writing these personal narratives, where if I'm not taking accountability for like myself, even if things are happening to me or if things are happening around me in this story, if I'm not taking the time to let the reader know, like, hey, this is how I played a part in it, or hey, this is how we got to like this thing, this like crazy thing that's happening, or hey, this is how, this is like, for instance, I write about both of my parents having PTSD in my book and like meeting during like the Persian Gulf War. And of course, like in my head, first of all, I didn't write this book with the intention to write the book. It just, I was doing my homework kind of, and I was writing about the same thing and it ended up being this. But as I was writing it, I was always in the back of my head thinking like, are they gonna be mad that I did this? Or like, how are they gonna feel about this? Or like, is this my story to tell? And that's like where I bring up that self-implication, where if I'm involved because like these are my parents, but I wasn't like in the army with them. I wasn't like there in that space with them, but I think about like the effects of them being in that space, and that's where I'm self-implicated, and that's where I play a role in like making it a point to insert that early on to like train the reader of like, this is about me, this is never about other people are involved, but like this story is about me. And I just try to keep that in mind. I really forgot the question that you asked. I started ranting, but yeah.
How do you write these hard things, these secret things, these aspects about your life?
Yes,
But you answered it. You answered it.
If I don't write the hard things, I'm not telling the story I need to tell. Like my story will fall flat, and that's when it won't resonate with the reader. Like as much as I have to like protect the content and like the people that it affects, I have to think about the integrity of like storytelling, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Cool. Tracy, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I think kind of to piggyback off what Kendra started saying, the idea of trust, you know, getting the reader to trust you. For me, and I know this sounds weird because I just wrote a memoir. I am a very private person, and I sort of grew up in an environment where no one really cares about your opinion. Just be quiet and don't say anything. So this was a really tough thing for me to do, because I would say something like, you know, the bomb went off, and just kind of continue on my story. And they're like, I'm sorry, you're going to need to back up and like really explain this whole, you know, what did you smell? What did you, that whole kind of situation. So I think, for me, though, it was this weird tug of war with my editor, who was amazing, but it was sort of, these are the things I will not talk about, and these are the things that I will open up about. And so and I'll just be very vulnerable right now. If anyone's read my book, I think it's pretty obvious that I have PTSD. I still do, from a lot of the things that I experienced. And so part of me didn't want to go there because you know, it's difficult, but it was really, really great being able to talk everything through. It was actually a healing process for me, quite frankly. And I was worried that readers wouldn't connect with my experiences because they're so, I don't want to use the word outlandish. That's not right. It's just, you know, I'm serving in war zones, things like that. But the way that, you know, we were able to get it, everyone found connections in different ways. But it was very important to me to actually not include boyfriends, those kinds of things, because it kind of detracted from, and so that was sort of this weird tug of war with my editor. But in terms of what you're talking about with the national security, I mean, that you sign a non-disclosure when you leave the CIA, that if you publish any works, it has to go through their publication review board. And so my book does have redactions in it. That was not my decision to publish it like that. That was my editor's, but that was after 6 rewrites.
Wow.
I think a lot of people, I saw a comment that someone said I was lazy for leaving them in. But what people don't realize is that when I got the book back, there were 6 chapters that were redacted in their entirety. And they actually don't tell you why. And so you have to guess. It's, just throwing spitballs at a wall. And so I would guess and guess. And then I petitioned 2 of them because I felt that they should be in, and I won on 2. But then those other 4, it took about 5 additional tries and rewrites. And so we got it down to where it was like intelligible. And my editor said, no more, we're good with the way that it is right now. So some of what's in there or not in there wasn't my decision because of national security. I don't want to go to jail. So
we don't want you to go to jail either. Sarah, you talked about, a very trying time in your life in your book. How did you have the courage to kind of write about it?
Well, one of the weird things about me is that I had already been writing about my life. I had already been, it was not, I'm sort of the opposite of what Tracy described. I'm this very open person. And when I was drinking too much, I was the person at the bar that was getting drunk and saying, hey, I drink too much. And you were like, okay, thank you. I was already writing those stories. My mother is a therapist. And so I'd say that she did this to me. She was always giving me this sort of like, it's okay, you can talk about your feelings. And like, I don't think she knew how far I was going to take that. So I'm a weird, I remember seeing, that show Girls, HBO's Girls. So I remember seeing Lena Dunham interviewed, and she gets naked on that show, which just like sounds like a nightmare to me. And somebody was like, why do you do that? And she's like, it's just normal. And I was like, that's horrifying, but she's the perfect person to do that because it's very normal for her. That would be hell for me, and I will do anything not to avoid that fate. But when I write about my life, that's just getting naked on Girls, my version. It's very comfortable for me. But what's different and what these answers have brought up is that you bring other people into your story with you, and they do not have that free-flowing feeling that I do. And these questions get at the knot of the morality of what it is to do this work. And I think that the answers have already pointed toward something that I think is cool about memoir writing is that if done well, it can really make you a better person. It can be engaged with the act of being a better human being. It can, as Kendra spoke about, help you find accountability. What was my role in this? This is not a blame game. The worst memoirs are score-settling revenge memoirs. They might sell well. They're not good reading. They're not the timeless books. As Tracy talked about, the act of staring down the painful episodes from your life can really help you heal that in a way that if you close the door on it, you might not. And it's not a pleasant experience. No one's going to say this is fun and it feels good. But if you can do this, this can really help level you up as a human being. But this question of what you write about, this is what keeps me up at night. I don't know how to explain it, and I'm not trying to brag. I just don't really care that much what other people know about my life. I care immeasurably and enormously and to a sickening degree what you care about other people in my life. And my parents are very good people, and they got dragged into that last memoir, and anybody that dated me is getting dragged into this next one. And it's like, how do you do this? And I think I always say there's a line that David Carr used in Night of the Gun. He's a New York Times media critic. And he said, tell the truth and no harm can come to you. Something like that. And I don't think that's true exactly, but I think what he meant is just like, tell what happened. If you tell what happened, they can't say you didn't tell what happened. What I mean is you don't ascribe intention to other people. You don't make up facts about other people that you don't know. You say what it felt like for you. This is how you're taught by therapists to argue, not you don't care about me, but I feel like you don't care about me. The difference is major. And that's how you write the book, is you write it knowing that it's your story. And, you know, we've already gotten into the tripwires of like, is it your story to tell? And I don't tell other people's secrets. And I share pages with people who I want to keep in my life, meaning that I will sit down with them at some point in my process and I will show them what I'm working on. Not everyone does it, and I'm not sure I would recommend it for everybody, but it's something that I do to help me sleep at night, to know that I'm not going to ruin your life by telling a secret I didn't know was a secret, because I'm this person that because my boundaries are different from other people's boundaries. So I'm sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but this is a very deep topic.
Yeah, I think it's good for, I'm sure the audiences here would like to know stuff like that too, if they're wanting to write memoir. Kendra, in your book, When You Learn the Alphabet, it says you discuss topics like colorism, feminism, PTSD, homophobia, and the N-word. How does memoir lend itself to talking about these big topics versus maybe other mediums?
Yeah, for me, I think I'm just naturally the kind of person who's thinking about the bigger picture all the time. Like, I'm always thinking about like the root of an issue versus like the issue at hand. And that's like, I'm a bad debater in that way, where I can't like just think about like what's happening to me. I'm thinking about what's happening to every single person like me, and like the big root issue of that. So when I'm writing, I always start out with myself, and then through like that personal narrative. For instance, my essay on colorism, I start off talking about like my dad's side of the family, who is like way lighter than me. Like, I'm the darkest person on that side of the family, and how I'm like the one who gets like snarky comments and like you getting darker, or like things like that, that's like said in love, but it's really like disrespect. So like I write that, and then I go into I start thinking about like how I grew up, especially dark-skinned Black women and little girls, how like they all have this similar story that I have. And I'm like, if they can't write their own vulnerabilities on the page, I'm lucky enough to like be a voice for them. And it's kind of like what Sarah was saying, having that dialogue with people that you care about what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, what's their boundaries. And a lot of times I like talk to people and they like, yeah, that happened to me. And it's like, you put that in the right words that I couldn't put it in. And like, I'm actually talking to real people. Like, I'm trying to humanize these big issues on the page where it's been like a trope for so long, like the N-word, colorism, PTSD. Like, we hear these buzzwords, but we never see like the human behind the buzzword. Like, we talk about, we want mental health awareness, but like we just throw up a number on the TV, but we never have moments to sit down and actually talk to people who are like struggling with these things and their experiences. And I have my own experiences, but my experience is not everybody's experience. I keep that in mind all the time too, that I'm not a voice for everybody. I can only speak for myself, but I can also take moments to bring them to the forefront where they feel like they're never heard or never seen. And I think I've learned this when I first started writing nonfiction. This was like during when Roxane Gay was like super, super big, and like Bad Feminist had just came out. And it's not even my favorite book, but the way that she was doing cultural criticism, I wanted to incorporate that in my personal narrative. I'm always trying to push the way we write personal narrative, because sometimes I think it can be boring and like straight and long and unnecessarily long sometimes. And I'm always thinking of ways where I can make it interesting. And I think cultural criticism for me gives me that chance to kind of inspect the world and how we move as a society, as well as that self-implication of how I assist and how I take accountability in those things that I have issues with. Yeah.
You had a unique experience writing. I'm sorry. But you also had to work with the U.S. government when you're working on your book. But I also noticed you worked with Jessica Anya Blau whenever you were writing this book. She's a fiction writer. How did that experience working with another writer on this book go? Like, yeah, if you can explain that.
So Jessica's she's a novelist, and I would actually say she and I are basically sisters. She knows everything about me, and I know everything about her. And like, I think all y'all have got the drift is sometimes I can be a person of not enough words. I think Kendra was saying that sometimes they're, too long and too, and I agree. I've seen that before, but my problem was that, I had surrounded myself in these careers at the CIA, at the FBI. And I know this is weird to say, but I did not find myself as unusual or unique. All of my friends had worked there. So for me, that was my norm. And I did not see that interrogating a terrorist was not normal. I know that sounds very strange. And so what I was having problems with was I was just skipping over things in 2 words that I had done and sometimes focusing on the wrong things. And Jessica would actually help sort of steer me the other way. And so what we did was actually not ghost writing. We actually truly collaborated together, which is a little bit more unusual. Usually you'll just see sort of a complete like ghost experience. But because I had done writing before, and she was a novelist, we sort of actually blended the two, because sometimes she would go off on this, I think, not true storytelling way. And, this being a memoir, I would have to rein that back in. But then other times I would not think that something was relevant or important, and she would help me kind of flesh that out. So it was actually a really good and cool experience for both of us. And, she's the one that really helped me decide. It was very difficult for me to put the FBI chapters into my book. I don't know if anyone's read it, but I felt like a failure because I had been so badly harassed there. But, she sort of helped me realize that I needed to be vulnerable like that, and that whether or not women had worked in those careers, whether they had lived that experience, they would be able to connect with that. And so far, it has gone that way. And, it was a really great relationship to be able to do that with her.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was really interested in learning how that works, but I can see the narrative aspect of her job as a novelist and your memoir kind of blended perfectly. That's awesome. Sarah, you mentioned at the beginning that part of your memoir includes some journalistic aspects. You interviewed scientists, you added some research information in there. I don't think everybody knows that can go into memoir, and that maybe the memoir isn't just this whole narrative story. So what kind of research do you usually do for your memoirs? How do you incorporate it into your books?
Yeah, I actually think journalism is a great and underutilized tool in the memoir writer's toolkit, because it can really help elevate the material. And it helps to take the material from "it happened to me" to "it's happening to everyone." And now Kendra has spoken about memoirs by their nature are sort of universal and we have elements of cultural criticism. But when you have the actual journalism, as in, I have statistics. Statistics are a very dull way to talk about journalism, by the way, and they don't make for great paragraphs. But let me use that as an example of just to say, it's one thing when I tell you that I had a drinking problem. It's another thing for me to tell you that during the years that I had a drinking problem, women and men, the gender gap between women and men's drinking was starting to narrow, and that there were more women that were having substance abuse issues than ever before in history. And, so you start to get the portrait of, oh, it's not just this woman, it's this culture. And journalism really helps fan the cards out in a way. And, I think one of the difficult things about it is that I'm such I love the intimate voice. And I don't like the clunky paragraphs that interrupt and say, in the Pew Research studies, we have, you know, it's just like, kill me. But I needed this one chapter at the beginning of my book to tell you what a blackout was, how the science worked, what the landscape was. And it was like this download that I was going to do. And then that voice was gone. And then from then on out, it was just going to be my story, and you were going to be there with me. And what's so funny is that I think there's journalism in like 9 pages of a 270-page book. But when I would get interviewed, they were like, there's so much journalism, just so much journalism, tons of journalism, because it's just not, I think because A, it hits and it does what it's supposed to do, but 2, because not a lot of books do that. And I wanted to go back to something Tracy said, because I think it's really important, which is that I don't think we always know what's interesting about our own story and why our story matters. And Tracy has a high-end extreme version of that, which is that, I mean, hilariously and adorably, she has the most exciting story and does not know how interesting it is. But this is actually a very common problem with memoir writers and with all kinds of writers, which is that most of us, because we are stuck in our own echo chambers, do not know what is different about us. And it's very tricky. You know, for me as a binge drinker, I was like, everybody knows what a blackout is. Everybody blacks out. It took me a really, like, I didn't understand that, like, maybe some people don't drink to blackout. Maybe that's not happening. It's very important. And I do think, to take this all back to journalism, one of the ways you start to figure out how your story is different from other stories in the world is by reading about it, by reading nonfiction books about the topic that you're covering. And that will start to give you a sense of where your unique story kind of slots in. And that can help you. I mean, because a memoir is nothing but choices. How are you going to tell this story? And the way that you want to tell it is with the most kind of impact. And one of the important parts of that impact is knowing what's different about the life that you lived. And for most of us, our life wasn't that weird because it happened to us. And so you're trying to figure that out. So anyway, I just think journalism is our friend. That's where I'm going to land.
You kind of just went straight into a question that I was about to ask all of you, which is like, you know, memoir and nonfiction can be this medium in which you don't have to be a politician or a celebrity to tell your story, and your story matters. So since you kind of started getting us into that, Sarah, I'm going to go to Kendra on this and kind of ask her, you know, Kendra, you're somebody from Dallas. I've read some of your interviews. You love Dallas, which I'm so into. Why can somebody from Dallas, you know, who just tell their story? Like, how do you find that thing inside yourself to say, hey, I have something to say, it's important, and I think the publishing world will take it?
For multiple reasons. One, because I think I was like so lucky to grow up with the people that I grew up with, like going to school with the same people for like long extended periods of time. And I literally see like the most talented people ever in life. And like, they don't know what to do with the talent. They don't get opportunities to do anything with their talents. And I felt like so fortunate to be able to find like an avenue where I can put my my passions to like work and actually have it turn into like a tangible thing. So I always feel like everything I write is for like all my friends that like I grew up with, and like I'm speaking, like we speak the same language, and whenever I write, I'm always thinking of Dallas as the place where the world needs to see. I always feel like Dallas is on like the precipice of like greatness. Like we're great, but like we're always like on the precipice of it. And I just like, if I can be a part of like that, just like Dallas Writers Workshop is like an amazing thing that like I didn't even know was in Dallas because I haven't lived in Dallas in so long. So just seeing that in motion just gives me motivation to make sure Dallas is always present in my work. But I forgot the second part of your question, so can you repeat it?
Kind of how do people get to the point where they can believe that their story matters?
Yeah, I got to that point because I couldn't write anything else. Like, I literally had to convince myself that it was worth writing. Like, of course, if I share with people, they're like, this is good. But when your friends are telling you your work is good, it's like, okay, like, you're not gonna tell me it's trash, because then like we're gonna argue. And so just constantly rereading and revising. I think like revising is the actual writing within itself. Just the constant revising and me realizing the other things that I was reading, like Sarah was saying, I was reading other nonfiction, and I was like, I'm kind of reading the same story over and over. And like, I know that I have like 30 stories better than this. So why not even try? Like, if I don't try to do it, I'm going to keep complaining about the things that my teachers are assigning me, or I'm going to keep complaining about being forced to like, because we live in a culture where like if a large amount of people like something, you feel like you have to like it too. Like, you can't be the one saying like it's kind of mediocre, because then you sound like a hater. And so that was like my motivation to tell like my actual stories, because I know that my friends are gonna like it. That's a motivating factor for me. Like, my friends will feel this, so I know it's good, because my friends are like the most talented people ever. And if they don't get this shot, I'm gonna do it for them. And so that always just been like the thing. Yeah.
Tracy, you said you're a private person, and before you started writing this, it was a little bit hard to know what parts of your story are important. Now that your book's out in the world, how do you feel about your story?
So I guess, and I know you're not asking me this question, but I'll answer it to kind of lead into this. But sort of what I think Sarah was talking about before about, reading everything you can. So I actually went and purchased every single book that was written by someone that was in the CIA and the FBI, and then I read it, and I used a lot of it as endnotes when I submitted my book to the publications review board. So they would have a hard time saying, oh, we allowed this for this person's book, but not your book. And so as I started reading them, I started realizing, okay, first of all, there's not a lot of women who are writing this. Why? And the writing that was out there was very much geared, like I think I said before, it was very clinical. And I started realizing too, wow, I was not reading any books by women who had served both on the operations side of the CIA and the operations side of the FBI. And I was like, that's okay. So maybe my story matters here. And then as a teacher, I was seeing my students in my ear saying, I want to go into this career, but I'm not seeing women in this career. And I thought, well, okay, so my story does matter. It matters not just to me, but it matters to a lot of different people, even if it's just seeing a woman in these careers. That matters. Whether they like my book or not I don't want to say it's irrelevant, because it's not. I do care what people think about my book. Let's be honest. But it's just the simple visual of seeing another woman in these careers that I started realizing that matters. And so I actually have like no regrets. And writing this book has helped me overcome a lot of those things that was making me so private, which was not knowing how to deal with the PTSD, not knowing how to deal. So I was the opposite of you, Sarah. I had a mom and dad who were very much like, no emotions, no emotions, no emotions. So, I didn't know how to quite deal with that. And so, but writing this book has actually really, really helped me in terms of sharing and sharing more and being honest. And so that's how I started to realize I have a story.
Good. I love that. Well, those are going to be my questions for now, but I'm going to open it up to people here. There is a feature on here called Raise Your Hand. And if you'd like to ask somebody a question, you can hit the raise your hand thing. But I got one question already, so I'm going to unmute Alyssa. And Alyssa, if you can ask one of these panelists or all these panelists your question, please. Hopefully you can hear me, Alyssa. Oh, she doesn't have her microphone on. Well, I have it unmuted now. Okay. Well, I'm gonna maybe see if somebody then, I'll ask just one of you. Sarah, how many of your stories do you include in your first memoir versus reserving some for the second one? And this is from Alyssa.
Oh, that's a tricky question. I mean, to be honest, like I gave everything to that first memoir. I would have it was like whatever belongs in there. I would have given it everything. I wasn't like strategically going like, I'm gonna hold off on this for the next one. But what happened was, because the first memoir was about drinking, then all the drinking stories were what went. And then, I mean, I did drink a lot, but I had other experiences. And so what happened was that some large life experiences, for instance, this is a really strange story, but I was robbed at gunpoint in New Orleans, and I fell in love with the detective on the case. This happened to me in my 30s. And if you knew me during my 30s, it was like the most dramatic story. I thought I was gonna marry him. But it's not in Blackout. Because when we put it in Blackout, everybody was like, it was like real small, and everybody was like, what? You what? What? Wait, why? Where's that story? And it was such a tease to put it in there that we had to pull it out, which always made it feel strange. If you knew me during those years, you're like, that's so weird. You never mentioned the thing about the detective that you were in love with. So that's just an example of something that was big in my life, and it shaped me during that time, but it didn't go in that first book. It just didn't go. Mm-hmm. And so that meant that when the second book was coming up, and then of course the second book is more about relationships and dating and singlehood, so it goes there. It's more a question of like there's like buckets that you need to put these stories in, and the books are little buckets. But I think when you first start, you're like, I gotta give them all my worst stories, or at least that was my impulse. And what you realize as you put together a memoir is that what a memoir needs is a variety of stories. So not the same story told every time. So for me, a dumb drunk that kept falling into bed with strangers, you don't need that story told 10 times. You need that story told once really well, and then a couple times stupidly, like just for like color. But you can't just keep telling. Variety and composition is part of the process, is what I want to say.
Nice. I don't know if anybody can figure out the raise your hands thing. I actually have not used it before. Blake, if you have any suggestions on how to make it work.
You hit the reactions and then you do the hand like that, right?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go for that. That looks good. Okay, I see a couple. Lori, did you have a question? Hold on, I'm gonna unmute you if I can.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I wrote down a question early on, I think when Tracy was talking. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I think he talked about overcoming, it sounded like you're sort of talking about overcoming internal editors that tell you stuff like what you have to say doesn't matter, or what you have to say isn't interesting, but maybe not. I mean, you could, I guess I'm wondering if that was a battle for you or not, or any of the writers, if they want to comment on like those internal editors that say, oh, your story's just dumb, you don't need to write that. And that was my thought.
Oh, thank you for your question. For me, that was a huge obstacle for me to overcome. And I think I talk about why it is. I talk about, the incessant physical and mental, emotional bullying and abuse that I endured, you know, really all growing up. But I think for me, the biggest issue was, and I think kind of towards Sarah's point that she was talking about before, was how to make it all go together, because there was all these different themes kind of coming on. I thought that, you know, it just had to be one book about this one thing, and that's not how it had to be. And so for me, as the book went on and on and on, and, you know, your editor's kind of in your ear telling you, I want more and more and more and more and more, you start to get, those voices start to go away. I guess for me, they did.
Bethany, you had your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you.
Or sorry, Maya.
It's okay. I have two first names like Ricky Bobby. Sarah touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to kind of revisit it as well. Do you all feel like your backgrounds, I know each of you talked about either having aspirations to be a journalist or already writing printed materials in the journalism field. Did you feel like that either helped you or hurt you in the art of storytelling for nonfiction? Because I know Sarah kind of mentioned sometimes, or telling other people's stories, you might be really good at that, but feel sometimes falling flat in your own. I just wanted to know if you felt like your journalistic background was a help, all three of you.
Well, I think I'm the only one that has an official journalistic background, so I'll take the question and just say that the one thing I think is that it's sometimes really, I don't know where the line between art and journalism is, and nobody really does, and what things you can fudge and what things you can't, and nobody really does. And so because there's very clear lines in journalism, I often get, like, I'll get these notes back from the editor, like, just make these 3 doctors 1 doctor. And I'm like, can't do that. I'm gonna lose my job. I mean, it's my instinct to be like, I can't do that, even though the reader would really like those 3 doctors to be 1 doctor, because nobody wants to meet 3 doctors in a scene. And so it's hard. And I remember doing a panel once, and this guy in the audience ran the nonfiction program at one of the Iowa. Anyway, he came up to me afterward and he said that he thought memoir was miscategorized, that it should be in the fiction category, and that all the problems with memoir come up from the fact that it's categorized in nonfiction. And so people expect journalistic rigor, but you really shouldn't, because nobody was carrying around tape recorders with them when they were 7 years old. And bless you if you were. Like, I want to meet you. But most of us we're doing our best, maybe not making it up, but there's a certain improvisation or best guess. So that's where that stuff becomes hamstrings me. But I feel like I've already answered that question, and the 2 other ladies have maybe things to say on this.
I'll go. For me, I think I wasn't in journalism that long. Like, I changed my major 3 times in 1 year, but I took like 2 journalism courses, and if anything, it taught me what I wanted to do, because in journalism, I was writing creative nonfiction, and that's why I wasn't clicking. I would, like, I'll turn in things, and she's like, this is too much opinion. Like, this is too much. Like, I don't need all of this. I'm like, okay, so what is this? Like, I know I want to write true things. So what do I need to be doing? She's like, this is more creative writing. This is more this. So journalism literally, like, helped me find out what it is I wanted to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna let Richard have his hand up. If you want to ask a question, Richard.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists. I have a 2-part question. The first part has to do with, how do you know when your storytelling or your memoir writing becomes too self-indulgent? Is there an alarm that goes off? And then the second part is, I was talking to an agent one time about a memoir I have written, And as I was describing it to her, she stopped me in the middle and she says, "Oh, so this is a quiet book." And I could tell I lost her there. So I wondered if any of our panelists have had trouble or categorize their books as quiet books versus a noisy book, which to me means one that has a lot of action and a lot of stuff happens. So I'll leave it there.
I would like to answer the self-indulgent part, because if there were an alarm that could go off when you were too self-indulgent, I would immediately buy it at any cost and have it installed on every writing device I had, because it's one of the trickiest questions. And I think one of the things is that by writing, you have to indulge the self. It is an act of indulging the self. And you have to dive into memory and emotion. And if you don't, you're cheating the moment. And then you have to know that on the other side of that, in the editing process, there might be someone who kind of pulls back from that and says, well, yeah, that was a little too self-indulgent. I mean, I think a lot of times you either need a different mindset, meaning that old idea of like, you write with the door closed, you edit with the door open. You know, the other one they say is write drunk, edit sober, but I don't like that one. You know, you need to share it with other people. And and just know, I think that memoirists get tagged with the self-indulgent thing, but here's what we need to remember is that everybody is telling their own story. Novelists are telling their own story. Nonfiction writers they're all doing it. They're all trying to, wish I could remember this thing Kendra said, rewrite the parts that they wanted to write. Like, she had this great line. That is what they're doing in their own way. And memoir is just a different kind of way to do that. And so it might be more transparently self-indulgent, but I can promise you that there's self-indulgence in every genre. And it's just something that a good editor or a good somebody can help you with that feedback. And I'll leave that there. See if anybody has other thoughts on the quiet thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Kendra.
You can go, Tracy.
No, you go. You got it.
I was just gonna say, like, there's like this thing of nonfiction having to be this sort of trauma porn kind of thing, where if something bad or something traumatic is not happening in a memoir, that it's not good. And yeah, all I really had to say was like, that wasn't the agent for you if they couldn't actually see the depth of your story without it feeling without it being what's the word, obnoxious, if that's the word. Yeah, without it being loud or over the top. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I'm gonna ask, we have 3 people whose hands are up right now, so I'm gonna let those 3 answer, and then we'll wrap up if that's okay with the authors. Okay, cool. I don't know exactly what your name is, Khaki Chris, but
Khaki.
if you would like to ask a question.
So I'm like, young, getting into writing, and I was just wondering if whenever you're writing, do you ever get trapped in a loop where you just dwell on one section and you just like, what you're trying to say, but you just can't seem to get the words out, and you need to perfect this section? Like, how do you, because you lived through it, how do you get it out on paper?
Tracy, do you know how to answer?
Yeah, I had a particular part of my book, Me and Emotions, it just wasn't going. And I could not find right words to explain my thoughts on a reaction about something. And so for me, and I'm guessing a lot of people don't do this, but for me, what I had to do was actually walk away. And I walked away from that for almost 2 weeks. I know that sounds weird, but I walked away from that sentence. It ended up being actually 2 sentences that needed to capture an emotion that I felt for months, because I think we can't talk about months long emotions for chapters and chapters and it doesn't flow. And so for me, I had to walk away, and I walked away for a really long time, to the point that, are you ever going to finish this? Are you ever going to finish this? Are you ever going to finish this? And I actually just started sort of writing other things. And then every night I actually started journaling about why I was stuck in this feeling. And then I wrote all of that down. And then I was actually able to condense it, but it took me a good almost month to get to that what you can't, my piece of advice is you can't beat yourself up if you can't come up with the exact thing that you want to say right away. I don't know that anybody can. Kendra and Sarah are incredible writers, but I'm guessing, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that, it takes time to get there. You cannot beat yourself up about it. And if you need to walk away and come back to it. It's okay.
I think one of the great fantasies about any kind of writing is that it happens instantly, and that it's almost like we want to get over things instantly. We want to get, like, we all have this instant gratification idea. And I think one of the things you have to commit to if you're a writer is the slow and inexorably slow process of it. That just like getting over a heartbreak or getting over grief or getting over whatever it is, these things take time to see your role in it, to be able to write about it with enough clarity to even know what happened to you. I think a lot of times I like to write out of immediacy, and that those pieces don't work.
Yeah, I just add like one more small thing. I definitely agree with what Tracy said about like taking a break from it. I haven't looked at a manuscript that I'm working on for like a month, and I feel great. But something else that I always tend to do, like if I feel stuck, I always read poetry. Like I'm always keeping poetry collections by me. For some reason, poetry always has the words to emote something that I just can't put into words, and I always find it in a poetry collection, or I'm online surfing poetry. So yeah, poetry's the greatest.
All right, Presley, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. So I heard each of you talk about your editors, and then someone else brought up the question of an agent. And it sounds like the editing part of it is obviously a very important part. So I was curious to know, in that relationship, in what part or at what point in your writing and your memoir did you realize I need an editor? And did you find an agent who recommended one, or did you find an editor before you went to an agent? What's sort of the process, and what was your best practices from your experience?
So for me, I don't know, again, I'm just speaking from my experience. So when you write a memoir, I did an outline of it, and that's what I had an agent, and that's what I shopped around to different publishing houses. And I'll just be very frank. Mine took quite a while to sell. No publishing houses wanted it at all. They had a really hard time juxtaposing femininity and espionage, and just wanted it all different and cut out. It took years and years and years, but finally, actually, St. Martin's or Macmillan is who purchased it. But it took a really long time to get a publisher and an editor assigned. I got an agent very quickly, but a publisher, it took years.
Kendra or Sarah?
Well, there's to me, there's two questions in here. One of them is about the business of selling a book. And so like for that, like you almost invariably need an agent, and it's very hard to do that without a manuscript. And so for me, because I was writing online, I had that platform to kind of present myself. And so I got an agent that way. Like somebody saw a piece that I wrote and reached out to me, and that's a lucky break for me. But like that, you tend to need something to show that agent. And then your question about editors, though, the thing I want to point out is that I was saying editors kind of loosely, because actually the publishing editors, they don't do that much editing. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. I think an editing relationship is so important, but a lot of times you find that with your friends, with other writers, with people in a writing unofficial writing group, with readers that you trust. So when I'm talking about like handing it to somebody else, that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that you sold the book to. In fact, sometimes they don't have time to read your book in the middle of, like, some editors, it just depends. Like sometimes you'll like sell a book, you have a year to write it, and they don't want to hear from you. So you can't ask them to hold your hand. So, I think it's up to every writer to develop some sort of relationship with, another writer, or somehow, maybe sometimes it's the agent too, can be a really good reader. But so I hope that helps illuminate that. But the business, all that stuff is it's so important, but it's very like nebulous and hard, and they make it really hard to sell books. I don't know if you've noticed that. Sorry.
Okay, Marlo, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Thank you. I just wanted to know from one or all of the authors, when you started your writing process, did you have the full intent of, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this book, or did it start with small stories, then you kind of developed it into, I think I have a larger body of work here that I may piece some of these smaller stories. I see something bigger here. Did you publish some of those smaller stories that maybe you got some response that was positive, and then that kind of helped you along in the larger body of work? And then two, how long did it take you to actually complete the body of work, not necessarily publish it? I know publishing takes years and years and years, but as far as when you said, I think my work is finished and it's ready to be submitted as a complete work.
So my book began, I was writing for essays for Salon, and they were little 1,500 word things about my life. And I wrote one about quitting drinking. And it was my way of kind of coming out to other people about this change in my life. And I got a lot of positive feedback. And it was when I first started thinking maybe there was more here. And I always wanted to write a book more than anything, but I'd never found the right thing. And then I started thinking maybe this is it. Mm-hmm. Then I started putting together a proposal. And then I sold the book. By the way, I remember this writer telling me at the time, like, don't put together a proposal, just write on your book. Because putting together the proposal, like, it makes you sick and it makes writers crazy. And I was like, okay, whatever, thank you. And then I went ahead and did that. And it was a total mistake, because then I spent the next year kind of spinning my wheels. But eventually I did sell the book, and then I had a year to write it. But I thought I was going to write my book in 4 months, and it took me 3 years. And it was a slow reveal of what it was going to look like. I just think I knew that it was going to be a book, but I didn't know what that meant exactly. So.
Yeah, I think I had like a very different experience. Because like I didn't have an agent. I didn't have an agent interested in me. I didn't know even how to get one, or even knew that I needed an agent to get my manuscript published. But it didn't start off, like I said, I was doing homework assignments in undergrad, and everything I start writing ever comes out of anger at some extent. Like, I'm writing through anger. So I was in school during the time where, like, Mike Brown got killed, Trayvon Martin got killed, like all these murders. And I just was writing it to like piss my professors off. I don't know why I thought that would make them mad, but I was doing that. And then after about 2 years, I was still writing about the same thing. And I was getting mad at myself, like, Kendra, like, why you can't write nothing else? Like, you writing the same things over and over. And I guess like my one piece of advice is to follow that inclination of what you're writing about. Even if it feels like it's redundant, just keep following it. And I started writing this book when I was like 19, and I went straight from undergrad to grad school. And when I was in grad school, they sent out 100 million emails a day. And I saw a book contest with my favorite writer, who was Kiese Layman. He was like judging it. And I just went home and I was like, let me see what I have. And I went through every single essay that I wrote, and I was like, oh, this is actually a book. Like, this is a whole book. And I sent it in, and luckily, like, I was more excited that Kiese Lehman read my book than I was about actually winning the book contest. But after that, that's when I got I just got an agent like in January. So it was like a slow process. Like, I was writing the book from 19, and then it got published when I was 24. So I was writing this over like an extended period of time. But now I'm actually dealing with like the publishing world. So I'm learning everything Sarah's saying. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? Like, how am I gonna navigate this? So yeah, I think I had like a very different experience, and this time around it's gonna be the opposite of what I experienced. So yeah.
Tracy?
So I guess I'm like Kendra. I write out of anger. There was a lot going on in the world that was really making me mad. I don't want to get, too into details, but I was becoming really upset. And, one of the great things my parents had always instilled in me is like, be the change. Don't just sit around and complain about it. That's something that I always grew up with. And so I started writing, and I started writing for different media outlets about certain ways I was feeling about certain things that were going on within national security and the intelligence community. And then an agent had reached out to me. That's sort of how that had happened. And I started realizing that those were almost little vignettes that I could put into like different chapters of my book. Not all of them, but a lot of them were sort of setting up the outline or the proposal of my book, if you will. Once the book was purchased, obviously there were years in between there, but once the book was purchased, my editor unfortunately only gave me 6 to 9 months to write it. The reason is, and I understand this now, there were two women before me that had spent 3 years getting the book cleared by the CIA. The book was finished, but it took 3 years. And on that year, their books were denied in full. So I'm sure you can imagine the stress. If I wasn't a drinker before, I definitely was it was very stressful. But I actually heard back within 4 months that my book had been approved. But, I had a lot of edits to do, but that, my book had been approved. So I think they put that timeline on me because of what was going on. I don't think my editor was trying to be a mean person. I think it was just, unfortunately, the nature of writing a book that has to go through clearance first.
Thank you, everybody, for all your questions. I just want to end it by asking the authors if you can share your favorite craft book that we asked about, and if you can tell us if you have any upcoming work that we can check out and where we might find that.
Yeah, so the book that I chose was The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr, and she's a great memoir writer. She did the Liars Club, which kind of was really started like the mid-90s memoir boom. And she teaches at Syracuse, and it's like her course. It's the course that she teaches there. And I think that she goes through a lot of what makes memoir compelling, but also like how to be a moral person inside of that. And then I have the cover story on Texas Monthly now. It's Brene Brown, and it just came out. And if you're interested in her, she's also someone that writes, although less memoir stuff, but she certainly uses personal anecdotes. And then I'm working on a book that'll be out sometime in the future land. I have no idea when.
We just got our Texas Monthly, Sarah, so I'm going to read it now.
Yeah.
Tracy? Kendra? Whichever one.
Oh, okay. So the book I chose was Betwixt and Between by Jenny Booley, who's a professor at Columbia College Chicago. I was just lucky to be taught by her. But she's a poet, and this book she's writing about writing, but she's also using herself as a metaphor of the writing. So it's very, it's a narrative, but it's also an amazing like master class on like how to write. So really check that out. I have a poetry collection called The Collection Plate coming out of February next year, 2021. And I'm also working on a memoir titled Fruit Punch about the generational abuse of women in my family. So yeah.
The book that, and I don't think I submitted it, I'm sorry, is by Beth Caphart. It's called Handling the Truth. And so for me, it was actually recommended to me by Jessica, who I worked with, because I was having a lot of trouble. We all know I have a hard time like figuring out what's important, but what I was having a problem with, I knew I wanted my book to sound like a narrative. That was very important to me. I did not want it to be one of those clinical CIA books, but I am a very factual person, very journalistic in nature, and I was having a really hard time of massaging it all. You know, this has to be correct. This has to read exactly like that. And that book helped me kind of I don't want to say let it go, but be more comfortable in dealing with that. So I guess it's not really about a memoir, but it's about dealing with your own truth and how to write it in a way that is truthful, but is readable, I guess, at the same time, and interesting. For me, I just signed on, just be working on doing national security writing with CNN and with Fox News. So I've got both of the spectrums there. I guess, I don't know if that's good or bad. So that's good. And that's, I don't think I'll be writing another book anytime soon, but we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Well, I am so thankful for all three of you being here with me tonight. It's been so fun to get to know you and your work and your background. I appreciate it. If you were here and you would like to buy one of their books, Interabang Books has included the links in the group chat. So please buy your books from Interabang. You can pick it up in person, 25% amount of people can be in the store. You can order it online. If you're interested in seeing more of these lit talks, whether in person in DFW in the future, or maybe online, I don't know how we're gonna do this the next time around. Please stay connected with the writing workshops. We have a ton of writing classes, some that include memoir and nonfiction. I believe Kendra works at writingworkshops.com as well, as do I teach some classes. So I hope to see you more. I really appreciate everybody coming out. We had 91 people total in this session, which is amazing, and a lot of great questions. And good luck on your writing. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.